Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Conversations With. My guest is one of the most iconic media figures in Detroit history, Radio Hall of Famer Dick Purtan. Dick is in just about every media hall of fame there is, nationally and regionally. He ruled Detroit's morning drive radio audience with WJR's J.P. McCarthy for decades. If you wanted a slice of the morning drive audience back in those days, you could forget about it. Purtan and McCarthy were giants, and after J.P. passed away, Dick continued to rule until the day he retired in 2010. He's one of the most generous radio superstars and entertained generations of Detroit listeners with his assembled cast of Purtan's People as Dick led his charges to award-winning shows and monster ratings. Enjoy a slice of Detroit and national radio history in my conversation with Dick Purtan. So, you retired in 2010. You've been out of it a while now. How's it going for you, Mr. Purtan?
Well, let's see, 2010. This is 2020. So that must be 7 or 8 years. No, see, I've never been good at math. But anyway, yeah, it's going pretty well. As the Canadians say, how's it going, eh? It's going good, thanks for asking. Because I actually heard two guys say that one time. I was at on the 401 heading for Buffalo. My wife and I, Gail, and we were two truck drivers sat down. One was already there. The other guy sat down, and he says, how's it going, eh? He says, it's going good, thanks for asking. And I've never forgotten that. Never. Well,
I still want to be able to say about like a Canadian. It's like
boot. Yeah.
It's like a boot.
They cannot disguise that for some reason. That's the one giveaway every time that I've watched some show on TV or something.
Exactly.
But whatever.
Speaking of Buffalo, you got your start there, right? In radio.
Well, kind of, in a way. I went to Syracuse University. Well, wait a minute. When I say I got my start, the first show I was on, as I recall, was on, believe it or not, the Foster Brooks Show.
No kidding.
He was really a disc jockey is what he was in WKBW in Buffalo, 1520, still on the air. Well, it's different colors now. But anyway, and yeah, so I finagled my way up to his studio. I was probably, I don't know. Well, the first time I ever went to the radio studio was to sit in with Clint Buhlman, and I was in grammar school, and I would take the bus by myself and go to downtown Buffalo, which is 5 or 6 miles away, get off, go upstairs in the Statler Hotel, 18th floor, and if Clint answered the door, he'd let me in, and if it was engineer Tom, the evil Tom, he would never let me in, so I'd have to sit in on the floor in the hallway and listen to him on the PA system. But anyway, so that I was never on the radio then. That's the first time I went. But the first time on the radio was with Foster Brooks, and I got in the studio. There were about, I'd say, 10 of the students in there. I finagled my way up to the table he was sitting at, with the microphone, and he was drunker than hell.
For real? Not his act?
No, not his act. No, unless he was putting an act on for us kids. And I got up to the table, and he was doing, between records, he was doing a commercial for Blue Dew. And Blue Dew apparently was some like a Downy laundry softener or something. I don't know what it was. Anyway, and I was right next to the table. He grabbed me by the neck in the middle of the commercial. He said, does your mother use Blue Dew? And I said, yes. And that was the first time I was ever on the radio.
Did you know when you were in grade school that was the career for you? Did you know this is what I'm going to be?
Yeah, this is what I wanted to be. Age 6, I would say. My father bought a floor model radio,
no kidding.
And it had a record player, and it had a speaker with a microphone. So I could stretch the mic a little bit, and I'd go into the closet, and I'd read the newspaper or something out of the paper, or read the ads or whatever. And my parents would listen to me, and they thought I was terrific. And so anyway.
And so did mine. What a mistake they made,
yeah. Yeah, what a big mistake. Exactly. So anyway, yeah, that's what I wanted to do from the beginning. I mean, other people want to be brain surgeons and sports announcers, and I didn't want any of that the big time and glorious. I just wanted to be a disc jockey. And so I became a disc jockey. So anyway.
I was going to say, you've got famous names scattered throughout. Earlier in your career, you talked about Foster Brooks, but you also have a connection with Ted Koppel, right? Did you give him his first job?
Well, in a way, we were in college together. Ted was actually 2 years younger than me. And, Ted is actually from England. Some people don't even know that, but he was born in England. And in those days at Syracuse, he had a bit of an English accent. And if you kind of listen even now, it's a little bit of a different accent. But anyway, so I was the program director of the radio station in my senior year, and that was the top job of WAER, which was, the first college radio station or words to that effect. So anyway, I had to pick my replacement, who was a junior, who was about to become a senior for the next year. The problem was, I honestly, and this is, I don't know if it's my ego or what it is, but I didn't think any of the juniors were very well qualified. And so what I did, I picked a sophomore to be my replacement instead, who was about to be a junior instead of a senior. Well, that was Ted Koppel. So, yeah, I gave Ted his first break in the college radio. And, we became friends ever since. And, we talk occasionally and we, corresponded and so forth. So anyway, that's Ted, and good guy, smart as a whip. And that was my one claim to fame.
No, there are other claims to fame. Like, for instance, and again, reading up on you, you go from Syracuse to Cincinnati. You introduced the Beatles. Dick, you know what a big deal that is historically?
Right. Now, it was a little more than introduced. What happened was this, that I was being offered a job at a Holiday Inn restaurant one night with a guy from Indianapolis. And he was offering me a job at his station in Indianapolis.
What in the world is the job at the Holiday Inn for?
But we just happened to meet there for dinner.
Oh, okay.
And he was in Cincinnati. And
I thought he was going to offer you a job as a front desk clerk or something.
He should have. But instead of that, he offered me the morning show at a station in Indianapolis. And I said, no, I've still got a contract in Cincinnati at WSAI, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, he said to me, just by chance, he said, who's got the Beatles for Cincinnati? Now, remember, because his station did. That was August of 1994. Yeah, it's hard to believe. So anyway, no, 94? 1964, pardon me. So anyway, I said, I don't know who's got them. He said, well, we have them for Indianapolis. I said, well, what's involved? So he told me what's involved. So the next morning I called one of the agencies in New York, and explained who I was, and I was interested in booking the Beatles if they had any opening dates, et cetera, what's required. So when I talked to the guy in New York, he told me we have to have a venue of, 13, 14, 15,000 people minimum. We had financially what it had to happen. He said we need a check for $12,500, cashier's check.
Wow.
And I said, whoa. So Gail and I had $2,500 we had saved, and I didn't have any more than that. So I went to four of the guys on the station, and I said, you guys want in? So they big bowed and stole the money. And we came up with $12,500. I sent the check to New York. I got the venue of Cincinnati Gardens, which was 13 or 14,000. I asked what dates were available. They gave me, one of them was August 27th, a Thursday. I said, I'll take that one after checking at the Cincinnati Gardens. They said that was open. So we ended up with the Beatles for $12,500. Now, what we had to do, in addition to the $12,500, was come up with another $12,500 before they took the stage. So that's what we did. We, from the ticket sales, we raised another $12,500 and many more dollars, obviously. And I gave that, mailed that to the Beatles. Well, we had to meet the Beatles. So I went to the other guys. They were in the deal, but actually it was because of that dinner that I had with the guy from Indianapolis that I was the guy that arranged for the Beatles. Otherwise, I probably would never even thought of it.
Did you interact with any of them, with Paul, John?
Yeah.
Did you? How were they?
Yeah, they were great. They were quiet. The loudest and most fun guy was Ringo.
Right.
George, as they said, was the quiet Beatle, not Ringo. That's another story. But anyway, so they sat on their cots, which was underneath the Cincinnati Gardens in, one of the rooms under the stand. And they would tune the guitars and talk with each other, and we talked a little bit with them and so on and so forth. And it was very friendly, and my God, they took the stage, and then I emceed it along with the other four guys. We took turns, at the microphone. and it was so noisy in there, obviously. So we sold all the seats out. We didn't even have seats for ourselves. So we sat on the floor, the cement floor, in front of the front row. And the girls, the screaming girls mainly, were so loud that even in the front row, we could hardly hear the Beatles. We heard them, but we
did it surprise did it surprise you at all that they blew up like they did, or did you kind of after that concert go, these guys are really going to go somewhere?
Well, they already were something. They'd already been on the Ed Sullivan Show, but this was their first tour of America, and we were just lucky to get them. And it wouldn't have happened otherwise, as I explained.
Yeah.
So
amazing.
When they broke up later on, they had changed. They were no longer saying "She Loves You," yeah, yeah, yeah. They were doing the more complex Beatles stuff.
Like Yellow Submarine.
Well, yeah, and Yellow Strawberry Fields Forever, and just different kinds of music. So as a matter of fact, I'm just looking at a picture that I have in our new condo. All of the Beatles are sitting in a press conference underneath the stands in Cincinnati Gardens, and I'm in the background along with Steve Kirk and Skinny Bobby Harper, and Dusty Rhodes and Mark Edwards. Those are the other four guys that went in on the Beatles with me.
The next thing I do, though, I want to take you from Cincinnati and the Beatles. Before we get to Detroit, there's one thing I got to ask you. Did you get thrown out of Baltimore?
I still have the tar and feather on my back. More than one feather.
I can't even imagine that.
Well, oh yes, you could. If you knew the general manager of WBAL in Baltimore, they are the BAL probably still is to this day. 50,000 watts. Big signal, covers Washington, Baltimore easily, more than anybody else does. But anyway, Al Burke was the general manager, and they were whining and dining me for weeks, and flew Gail and myself in twice to have dinner with him. And the deal was that besides the financial deal, which was $35,000 a year, which was actually less money by $10,000 that had already been offered to go from Keener 1310 a.m. over to WXYZ radio, now XYT,
right?
Which was going to be $45,000 a year to do the afternoon show, which quite honestly was pretty doggone money in those days. But I took the Baltimore show and the Baltimore move from Detroit because I wanted to stay in morning. So they offered me the morning show, $35,000 a year. I wouldn't sign a contract because I was a little hesitant about the move, but I took it anyway. The point is that 5 weeks later, they fired my butt. And for being ready, if you're ready for this, too wild for the town. And yeah. There were some things that happened that were bizarre. That you remember Gino Marchetti?
Oh, sure, defensive end for the Colts.
He sure was, all pro and all that kind of stuff. I had him on my phone one day because he'd been in the hospital. I saw his picture. Big Daddy Lipscomb, if you remember that name.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, had stepped on his foot. And as I recall, the game that he stepped on his foot 10 years before this is 1968 that I'm in Baltimore there.
Uh-huh.
And Big Daddy stepped on Gino's toe. And he 10 years later had an operation on that foot. And I think that was the game, as I recall, that is called, the most famous football game of all time?
The greatest game in the NFL, that championship game between the Giants and Colts.
Yeah.
Yankee Stadium. Won. Yes, they did. Alan Amici scores into the end zone.
Alan the Horse.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Unfortunately, a graduate of Ohio State, of course. But anyway,
what can you do?
Aside from that, that was so somewhere in the conversation with Gino Marchetti, I said something about, that took a few guts, whatever it was. I don't remember naturally. So I get a call from the general manager. He wants to see me. And so I go in after 10 o'clock when I'm off the air, and he said, Dick, you used a non-WBAL word on the air today.
And what?
Said, a non-WBAL word on the air.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, you can only imagine what word or words I was thinking of.
It reminds me of the Carlin routine now. The 7 words you can't say. Yeah. BAL had some other words, huh?
They had some other words. So I look at Al, and I said, finally I said, what word was that, Al? And he said, guts. I said, guts? He said, yeah, you used the word guts today. I said, I couldn't say guts. He said, no, that's a non-WBA word.
Oh my!
So anyway, that was
word.
just one example. There were other examples, but my favorite example of what happened in Baltimore during my 5 weeks before they fired me. 5 weeks. Unfortunately, I didn't sign the contract. Would have made me some more money, but I didn't sign a contract. And he paid me $4,000 to leave town. Gail, my wife, didn't even get the drapes up in our new house by that time. But anyway, the story is, I don't know if you've been, and I know you've been to Baltimore because you've covered games, I'm sure.
Sure.
But anyway, as you may or may not know, well, let me put it this way. Every morning at 7:20, I did a commercial, which was in the middle of a 5-minute commentary that one of the guys on the station did, one of the older fellas, and it was for Western Electric of Cockeysville. And so Al says to me, the general manager, he says, Dick, now don't ever want to hear you do any lines about Cockeysville. And I said, Al, have you ever heard me do any? And he said, well, no, you haven't. And I said, well, that's not what I do. So he leaned back in his chair. I remember he was pulling on his pipe a little bit there, smoking. And he said to me, well, Dick, I'll tell you what. He said, every now and then, maybe you can do a line about Cockeysville. And I said, I can? And he said, yeah. And then he said, but I don't ever want to hear you do any lines about the town that's 10 miles from Cockeysville. And I said, well, what town is that, Al? He said, Dickiesville. That's a true story, Jim.
Is it really?
True story.
You can't. You know what? I believe you because you can't make this stuff up. Those of us,
no, you can't make that stuff up.
Yeah, those of us in broadcasting have had these conversations with these guys. When you tell it to a layperson, they look at you like you're crazy, and you go,
"That's right."
No, it's the truth.
It's a crazy business, or was for me anyway. But anyway, I got a call a year ago from a couple that I know happens to be one of my son-in-laws. I've got 5 or 6 of those. So anyway, and they're friends of his, and they come along, and then my friend called me, or my son-in-law. They went through Cockeysville and Dickiesville on the same trip.
Did they really?
It confirmed the story that I had told many, many people through the years. Many, many people.
Well, Baltimore's loss is Detroit's gain and Michigan's gain. When you got to Michigan, or when you came here, you started at KNR, Keener 13, a legendary radio station in this market. Yeah. Did you know then that this was going to be home?
No, I only made it home and wanted to move here because my dad had taken me and my mother here. My dad was a salesman in Buffalo, but his biggest territory was Detroit and Michigan.
Right.
So we would come there every now and then. So I got to see Briggs Stadium, and I got to see downtown, and I got to see the pavement, the bricks still outside of Briggs Stadium. They're still there on Michigan Avenue. It's Trumbull. I mean, I got to know the town a little bit. So when there was an opening that I had read in the trades by a guy named Gene Nelson, who I knew, I'd gone to college with at Syracuse, I called him up. By this time, he was a program director, and I inquired of it, and he told me where to send the tape, and I did, and I got the job. And they offered me, actually, at Keener, the 3 to 7 in the afternoon show, which a guy named Gary Stevens had done. Gary was a great talent. He was from Buffalo, by the way, my hometown. So anyway, I turned it down. And he said to me, Frank Maruca, the program director, why are you turning it down? I said, I've never done an afternoon drive show, and you're a top 40 station. I really don't think that's what I would do very well. So then he called me up back in Cincinnati, where I was, back a couple of days later, and he offered me 7 to 10 at night, and I turned that down for the same reason. And then he called a week later, and he offered me 10 p.m. to 1 a.m.
Oh my!
And I took it. I took the job.
You took the late shift.
Yes. And Gail looked at me and she said, you turned down afternoon drive. You turned down the early evening. You've taken the late evening thing to 1 a.m. She said, why? I said, because I don't think that really means anything to anybody. I said, I don't think the manager will be listening. I think I can do exactly what I want to do, and nobody's going to fire me after 5 weeks. I'm just going to hopefully do well. And 2 months later, they moved me to morning drive, and everything went fine. But that's where I hooked up with Tom Ryan originally. He was on switchboard, all that kind of stuff.
Is that what you wanted all along, though, was morning drive? Was that your spot, you felt?
Yes, it was, because of the fact that's where more people were listening, and there was more money in it. It's probably more important than more listening, but whatever. So, and when I say money, I moved as I recall, in Cincinnati at WSAI, which was a great station. I loved it. But I was doing afternoon. I was doing mid-afternoon. Then I was doing morning, and I was making about $10,000 a year. And I think I came up to Keener in Detroit for $12,000 a year. So that was that's what that was. Big money.
We all did that. I mean, I started in Saginaw.
We all did it.
I started in Saginaw, Michigan at WEYI TV as the sports director, and I made about $8,900 a year. And that was
you were being overpaid a little bit at that rate.
That was 1972. But the problem was that we only had a 4-person news department. So when the weather girl, who was during the day a furniture salesperson in Saginaw, when she left, when she was sick, I had to go do the weather too. You can't make this stuff up.
No, you really can't. That's the way it was. And you know what? I think radio's kind of back to that way these days.
Well, and the thing I think too is that, and I know you feel the same way. I'm glad it happened that way because I learned more at that small station, at these little places where you had to pretty much do everything than I ever did when I got to Detroit, with quote unquote the big market. That's
right. Yeah, the big market. You're right. Yeah, exactly right.
Did you develop
the big market? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you got something to say. You're the guy I'm talking to.
Well, I was just going to say that I was going to when it's big markets, as we all do through the years. We get other offers from towns, some bigger, some smaller, I suppose. But I almost went to New York to do the morning show on WNBC. I accepted the job and shook hands, accepted the job, agreed on money. Which at that time I think I asked for $80,000 a year, and they said, "Okay, no problem." And I thinking, "Oh man, should have asked
more than that."
Well, anyway, it turned out that I was at WXYZ at the time, 1270 AM, and they were owned by ABC in those days. And I told NBC that I was free to go, that I could move anywhere except across town. I could go out of town. So ABC got wind of the fact that NBC had hired me to do this, and they threatened to sue NBC, and so I lost the job because NBC said we don't want to be sued. And the guy named Don Imus got the job, and he lasted until I think he passed away about a year.
Yeah. The rest, as they say, is history.
It's history, yeah.
Wow. Hey, was your style the Dick Purtan style always when you got to the mornings? Because you kind of developed and grew over the years, but it was pretty much that's who you were right from the get-go.
Yes, and the main reason I was who I was is because I always loved to hear voices on the air, comedy voices, imitation voices. The only problem was I couldn't do it. I could hardly do my own voice. So that's where Tom Ryan came in at Keener, because Tom could do voices. And so, and did a great job at it. So I always wanted to do voices. When I started out, I must say, in Buffalo and Syracuse. No, of course, it was just me doing the radio. But I was getting good reviews and things. The ratings were good and all that kind of stuff. So as I got to know Tom Ryan, and in Cincinnati getting George Hoffman, they could both do voices. So I just incorporated them in the show, paid them myself, and that was the rest was history.
And the thing is that it was you were creating a style, I think, and a new thing, because most people, like you said, I wanted to be a disc jockey, but at the time it was you would sit there between records and tell everybody what it was. You would read commercials and then roll the music. You did other things. You entertained with news of the day between the music, and the music became less a factor, and the comedy or the repartee became more of that factor, didn't it, of people listening?
Yes. Yeah, it definitely did. Yeah, that from that standpoint, it was kind of original stuff, a different feeling. Although I can't say 100% originally, because when I hitchhiked from Syracuse to New York City one day on the New York State Thruway, and I only wanted to go to see Clavin and Finch on WNEW in New York, 1130, which I later on got two different offers to do the morning show, but I couldn't do it. Once because I had a polyp and I couldn't. Well, there were just reasons for it. But anyway, Clavin and Finch, one of them did the voices and one was a straight guy, and they were fabulous, and I loved them, and I could hear them in Syracuse sometimes. So I listened to that, and I said, "Gosh darn, that's what I've got to do. I've got to get somebody who could do voices." And it eventually worked out for me where I could find, like Tom and and other people that could do voices, because I couldn't do anything except my own. That's it.
I gotta tell you that, and again, I'm going back to this idea and how your style and how you kind of thought this would work. One of the observers of your career, I read today, said that you are a pioneer in modern radio comedy format. That came out of your brain, and that was not being done everywhere on the radio, was it?
To my knowledge, no. I didn't know anybody was doing it except at Clavin and Finch. I did hear Clavin doing some voices. But, it's a funny thing you say. It's ironic because what you just said about I was a pioneer, I was whatever I was. The pioneers get the arrows, as the old expression goes, and I had my share of 5 weeks of arrows in Baltimore. But anyway, I've had 2 people in the radio business say the same things you just said about being a pioneer, and both of these guys said that I was their hero. And I said in both cases, I said, yeah, right. And they said, no, we're serious. And these 2 guys that said this at 2 different times to me, one was Rush Limbaugh, who, and I'll tell you the story in a moment, and the other one was Howard Stern.
See, I was just going to say, I hate to interrupt you, because was Stern a Purtan imitator of sorts? Now, he kind of went off on a different angle and a kind of a tangent, yet it was the primary format was basically Dick Purtan. He just didn't have the Purtan people, but he did kind of that with guests.
Well, it's a funny thing, but I have never met Howard. I've talked to him on the phone one time, and that was years ago. And the reason I talked to him is because I was getting calls when I was at CKLW that, I had a song that a friend of mine named Larry Lawson, a doctor friend, had written. These are the days when Elizabeth Taylor was a rather heavy girl. Remember those days?
Oh, I do.
And so Larry wrote a song, which I was then playing on the air, called, instead of Betty Davis Eyes, which at the time was the #1 song in the country, by Ken Carnes, he wrote a song called Elizabeth Taylor Thighs. So I was playing that song on the air, and I started getting calls from some guys that had been in Washington, D.C., and had heard Howard Stern, this is pre his New York days. He was at WWDC in Washington, and he was bad-mouthing me on the air, saying I stole his song. So I did something I'd never done before, and I haven't since. I called Howard at his station, and I got him on the air. Not on the air, but we were just privately talking. And he said, "Hey, Dick, what's going on?" I said, "Howard," I said, "listen, I understand you're bad-mouthing me for stealing your song." I didn't steal your song. Well, what had happened, the Washington Post had, for some reason, picked up the song I was playing at CKLW, and wrote a big column in their Sunday, what they used to call the Rotogravure, that colored section, they've got all the print. And anyway, about the song. It was a very long article. Well, Howard, because he was playing a song that he had called Elizabeth Taylor Thighs, he was embarrassed because they were saying in the Washington Post that I was the guy doing the song, which I was in Detroit. So anyway, in part of the conversation, he said, "Oh, Dick, I was only kidding. I wouldn't badmouth you. You're my hero."
Yeah.
And I said, "What are you talking about, Howard?" He said, "Well, I was working there in Detroit." And I said, "Well, I know you were, but I never heard your show." Anyway, he said, "No, hell no. I used to tape your show and I listened to it." Well, the bottom line to this very day is that Howard talks about me on the air on his show. I don't want to say, every month, but more like 2 or 3 times, just so often.
That was in my notes today I said Howard Stern basically is still doing Dick Purtan, but in just a different way. But the basic fundamental thing is that, so you kind of paved the way for him. You paved the way for all of us, a lot of us, Dick, but tell the Rush Limbaugh story, because he's a little different than that. He's a political guy. Tell me how he saw you as his hero.
This was amazing. I went to a speech one day. He gave it the Michigan Inn, which is no longer there. And this has got to be 20 years ago, I guess. I don't know. And I went to the speech, and sitting there. And when it was all over, I walked up to the podium. And he was still standing at the podium, answering, "Hi, how are you?" to people and talking to him and so forth. So anyway, at the very end, I stood in line back at the end. I came up to him and I said, "Hi, Rush. I really enjoyed your speech. I'm Dick Purtan from WXYZ," so that's a long time ago. That's in the 70s. And he backed up from the podium and he said, "Dick Purtan." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You're my hero."
Oh,
and I said,
wow.
"What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, let me tell you a story." He said, "When you were at WXYZ," he said, "I was at KQV radio in Pittsburgh." KQV, that's the call letters. And they were owned by ABC. He said, "They were sending me air checks of your show on a regular basis, and they wanted me," meaning him, "to do what you do on the air." And I said, "Are you serious?" I had no idea of any of that. And that was before Rush got into politics, as far as I know. So anyway, so I've been Howard Stern and Rush, the two most successful guys, I guess you could say, in the history of radio.
I wouldn't argue with that. I wouldn't argue with that at all. No.
Tell me I'm the hero.
Yeah,
So
well,
I apparently was underpaid a great deal.
Well,
they were making a lot of money and I wasn't.
For a lot of us, we stood on your shoulders, that really, Dick, in this market.
Well,
you and this is the next thing. For many years, you and J.P. McCarthy at WJR were kind of the dominant figures in a huge and wonderful radio and television market. And I think some people tried to make that into a competition, either the salespeople or the media, maybe.
Sure.
Did you feel a competition with Joe?
To an extent, because of the fact Joe and the 50,000 WJR, the newspaper in those days would print the ratings about once a month, and Joe always beat me. But now, because that was total audience, because that's the only thing in those days they were allowed to print was the total radio audience. What they couldn't print was the most important thing of all, and that was the demographics.
Right.
And I had the younger demographics, which were desired, of course. Not that Joe didn't; he had good demos certainly, but they were older, and a lot of the advertisers didn't want the older demographics; they wanted the younger.
Well, the advertisers wanted the demographic that people bought. The group exactly that bought is where they were going.
And it's a funny thing that reminds me when Joe died, and when they offered me the morning show to replace him. I was talking to Mike Feasy, who was the general manager of the station. God rest his soul. But anyway, the same with Joe, of course. But anyway, he said to me one day in my house, because we had a number of meetings in my house, and he said to me, Joe was making $1 million a year. And I said, "Well, Mike," I said, I don't mean to, blow your bubble here, but I said, I was making $2 million a year. And that was a true story. I really was. And not only that, but I owned part of 95.5, and because they'd offered me the morning show to re-up. Pardon me. At the time, I was running a 10 share morning, 25 to 54, pretty consistently, and which was number one. And that was the demo that most advertisers wanted, of course. So I was just raking in the cash like nobody's business.
Well, and the thing is, you were ahead of your time again in that regard in negotiating a contract where you got a piece of that money. You got a piece of the advertising dollar as opposed to just getting a salary. That was ahead of its time again. And
I don't think anybody else that I knew of had.
It didn't probably happen for another 10 or 15 years. I don't think.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if it ever did, to tell you the truth. But yeah, I was sitting at the Meadowbrook Country Club, a big round table. New ownership was in town that owned 95.5. And they were trying to get me to up my, to remain, re-sign the contract, and all that kind of stuff. And I said to them, I'd be happy to do that I'd like, and I probably should have said more, but I said, I'd like 15% of the radio station. And they kind of looked at me dumbfounded, but I'll be damned if that's not what they didn't do. They did give it to me.
That was so key. That was so important. It's thinking outside the box. Again, you're a pioneer in that regard.
And my attorney, Henry
Baskin, yeah.
That night, Henry didn't show up for the dinner. And he knew it was going to be a big dinner. And I don't know what happened. He didn't show up, so I negotiated my own contract.
That's amazing. Well, you did a great job. Now we get to the point where radio has changed. Everything has changed in the last 10 or 15 years, hasn't it? In your eyes, how has it changed? Is it because of the internet, because of so many different outlets now that the audience is so fractured? What is it?
Yeah, a combination of that and other things. Where people just stations, in the Detroit market, For example, it's typical of every market. The money spent on radio by advertisers now has just gone way, way down, and therefore they can't afford to pay the salaries that they used to pay. A number of us, I being one of them, JP was another one of them, and fellows at that time period, we're making more money than, generally speaking, than they're making now. God bless, I got Joanne on WOMC taking my old show there, 104.3.
Right.
Joanne has done very, very well, and so she, I'm sure, would in those days be making more than the money she is now, but she's doing very well. So in some cases, people are doing pretty well, but not as well as they used to in the heyday of radio, which was, back in our day.
Well, it's the same in television, too. I'm sure Joanne worked in television at WXYZ Channel 7. My wife, Robbie, did. And the last guy in that realm of media was Bill Bonds, who made more than probably most anybody you would imagine. And it's not the same like Bill anymore. Same thing in your instance.
That's exactly right. Billy was the big monster in those days, making all that money and doing very, very well. And what a character, and America's bad boy, or at least Detroit's bad boy that everybody loved.
Everybody loved him. Hey,
the
other thing is that some people said, and I know that your wife of 60 years, Gail, passed away, and
almost 2 years ago now.
Yeah, I know, but when you retired in 2010, most people said, Dick's getting out. It's he's not. But some people said it wasn't as much fun anymore for you. Would you agree with that?
Well,
I thought you always had fun on the radio. You never showed it if that was the case.
Well, there is a lot of truth to that. And just one example of that is New York, which, of course, everything comes out of New York. That's where the ownership was and so forth. They were telling me, along with so many other morning guys in the country, many of whom resigned and quit. And I was one of them. I just said, you know what? I've had enough. This is no longer fun. When they got to the point, and we had in the ratings, we were still, by this point, we were always 35 to 64. In other words, that demo is not the 25-54, but still a very healthy demo.
Absolutely.
And because the older you get, the audience gets older.
Yeah, but those people buy a lot of product.
They do. I know they do. But New York was saying, Dick, you got to play more music. And I said, really? Well, they got to the point where I'm playing like 9 and 10 records an hour. Well, I didn't want to do that. And I thought I was betraying the audience and betraying myself. And so I said, nope, I can't do this. So I started not doing it. And that's where we got in some serious arguments. And so I notified the management. I said, I will be leaving sometime in the next year. Anytime. And I said, you guys can pick the time if you want, but I know within 1 year from now. And that's exactly what happened. And so I was happy then. I tell you, Tim, I was happy then. And I'm still to this very day. I've never missed one moment on the air.
Oh, that's a beautiful thing. That's a great career in our business. That a lot of people can't say that. Yeah, a lot of people can't say that.
So true. Yep, I'm lucky.
The thing I love about broadcasting, here you got a guy in New York telling somebody in Detroit what Detroit really likes. It doesn't make sense, does it?
No.
And yet we've all gone through that. You get a new general manager who's from we had a guy from St. Louis come in. He says, this is what we did in St. Louis. And I looked at him and I said, St. Louis isn't Detroit, with all due respect. And yet they look at you like you're talking Greek, and they do what they did in St. Louis, and they don't get it. It does not work the same in St. Louis as it does in Detroit.
It's funny. That reminds me, Gary Owens, the late, great Gary Owens, from L.A. and
Laugh-In
and all that. Wonderful guy, super guy. And he told, he didn't tell me, excuse me. Well, he did tell me one time when I was talking to him in L.A., but he wrote in Radio and Records, which was kind of the Bible of the radio business. Anyway, he wrote in it, he said, for some reason, Detroit, Michigan seems to have the best radio talent of any country in America, any city in America. And I thought, wow, I read that and I went, holy cow. I didn't know if that was true or not, but that's what he wrote in his column.
You think of the legends that have been here? I wouldn't disagree. I mean, Ernie Harwell, you, Joe, JP, all the guys, Jimmy Lance, the guys at your place. I mean, we had all the guys that were around here. Paul Williams, way back in the day, Sonny Elliott.
I remember Paul. I remember, of course, all those guys. We really, the town had some wonderful talent. It really did.
Well, you're at
It's a tough competition,
well,
but it was fun.
you're one of the guys at the top of the list. But now I want to go back to the
thank
fun parts of your to finish this up. We want to laugh a little. When did you start spoofing people on the air? Because you called my wife Robbie the day before we were going to get married on the air and told her that the church had burned down. Do you remember that?
Yes. Yes, I do. And I'm sorry. Most of the calls were not quite that severe where the person would just go, "Oh, my God, no." You know, that kind of thing. I tried to lighten it up a little bit more than that. So I apologize to you and Robbie for that.
No, it became a topic of conversation for our entire marriage.
Yes. Oh, did it really?
Oh, sure.
I didn't know that.
Because we would say, we'd say, "Oh, yeah, Dick Purtan called Robbie up and told her we weren't going to be able to get married at St. Mary's because the church sacristy had burned."
What, say again?
The church sacristy had burned. That's what you told her.
Oh, is that what I said? Oh, okay.
And we couldn't get married at St. Mary's, but you had a hall, the Pulaski Hall in Hamtramck, that was willing to take us.
Oh, I got you. Okay, yes. I'm following that now.
Speaking of marriage, Dick also got married in 2020. It's his second marriage after his 60-year marriage to first wife Gail ended when Gail passed away from cancer. Dick's new wife, Donna, is an old friend, and Dick talked about how fate stepped in after Gail died.
You know how I met this lady?
How?
1971, Muhammad Ali fight with Joe Frazier at Madison Square Garden. I had to take a contest winner at WXYZ to New York. Donna was hired as a model because we were going to have an advertising agency party in New York as long as we were there. So we met her on the plane. She never got a ticket to the fight, which she was supposed to get, nor did she get a room at the hotel. And the guy, the promotion director, that's why a guy named Lon Hurwitz, he said, "Oh, yeah." When she called him and said, "I never got my room," he said, "Yes." He said, "You'll be rooming with me tonight." And she said, "Oh, really?" And so, yeah. So anyway, I made a call back to whoever the hell it was, got her a room. So we saw her then on the plane going back, and of course at the party. But anyway, then I hadn't seen her for a long time. Then she, once at my golf tournament up in Romeo, she was hired one time to be a model, I guess. I don't know what she was. And then, she's 11, 12 years ago, she invited Gail and I to go to her church, and I found out she was divorced. And she was divorced about 38 years ago. She hasn't been married since then.
Wow.
So anyway, I went to the church over a year and a half ago, whatever it was, not that quite that long ago. And I left. She wasn't there. She was at the early service. I left her a note that said, give me a call. She didn't. I didn't even sign my last name, just my first name. She called later that day and she said, "Is this Dick?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, what was it you wanted?" And then she said, "Wait a minute, is this Dick Purtan?" And I said, "Yes, Don, it's me." And so that's how a week later we had lunch, and that led to another lunch, and then dinner eventually. And
yeah.
Here I am, a married man.
There you are, a married man. That's what she said. She said sometimes she couldn't be happier. She says sometimes it just works out. God had a plan, and somehow right. I just think that's really, really cool.
It was quite a story, really. We felt it was that way anyway.
Absolutely. Well, back real quick, I want to get back to...
Sure, go ahead.
Purtan's people. That's what I'll tell you. You made more hay on impressions of Coleman Young than maybe Coleman Young made in his political career, do you think?
That was the great Joe Nune.
Exactly.
Great Joe. One of the greats. Just talk to Joe. I was at Donna and I were with my daughter Jackie and her boyfriend at a yogurt place at 6 Mile and whatever the hell it is, 6 Mile and something up in this neck of the woods. And we were there for 2.5 hours just laughing and talking. And I called Joe during the thing. And I said, "Joe, we're just talking about you." But anyway, every
time I see Joe, and I haven't seen him in a long time, but every time I saw him, I used to go, "Joe, give me some Coleman Young," because he was dead on with it.
Wasn't he though? Wasn't he though? Honest to God. Yeah.
Who were your Purtan's people? Joe was one, right? Big Al was one.
Joe, Big Al, and Jim Oakes.
Yeah.
And Dave Zorn. I talked to Dave just yesterday.
Did you?
Those were, and then Tom Ryan before that. Tom Delisle didn't do any vote. Well, he did a couple, I guess. But he wrote some stuff He was a better writer. Yeah, he was a better writer. And he passed away about a year and a half ago. And, oh, dear. But, and so it goes. And so it goes. But to tell you the truth, Jim, and I'm really 100% serious, these people enabled me to become whatever I became. You know what I mean? It was that they were all talented. They were all great people. Everybody got along, and we just had a super time. It was fun to work every day. It really was. Until the very end when New York got involved.
Forgive me, I know, but forgive me for being a football nerd, but Schembechler always taught us you do better as a team, and that's why I thought when Purtan's people, when you exploded, you became the maestro. But all of these talented people, Big Al, Tom Ryan, I also want you to talk about Mark Andrews. Mark passed away too early.
Oh, Doc. Oh,
he was
God,
Doc, good friend of mine. He was at Sports Broadcasters all the time. And Doc was also a part of that group. Did you write these things? Did you sit down and have brainstorm sessions like they say Johnny Carson used to do on The Tonight Show about some of these bits?
Very few. Because what we found was, let's say we go to lunch at the Golden Mushroom or any restaurant, the Coney Island, that was more likely. And we would sit there and kind of go over things the way we would do it the next day. And the next day, it never was as good as how we did it just sitting around a table. So I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to rehearse this kind of stuff. Let's just wing it. And so whether we had lines jotted down or actually was actually a script, we would never rehearse it. We would just do it on the air, and what would happen would happen. It worked out much, much better.
There's no question, because when I listened, I always thought, this is all ad lib. These guys are off the charts good.
Yeah, awful lot of it was.
Oh, no, I know, and that's the thing that I thought made it great. The spontaneity of it made it so real that people, I think, listened, enjoyed it so much because you never knew where it was going to take you.
Well, that's true, and we didn't either. And because with the screw-ups, which are going to get that way if you don't rehearse things,
right?
They can turn out to be the best part of the whole routine.
Usually people like the outtakes better.
They do, absolutely.
And
the classic with Big Al and Doc, Jackie wrote, but the screw-ups were so funny that we just left it all in,
Well, it was absolutely fabulous, and you and Purtan's people will forever be in the memories of a lot of Detroiters who listen to morning radio. I'm telling you, Dick, that stuff is.
The Purtan's people thing came to Channel 4. When I was doing for 2 years, I did a thing late afternoon, and it was between Archie Bunker, the Jeffersons, and Barney Miller. And I was on from 4 to 5:30. Nobody remembers this, not even me. But anyway, it was that they named the thing Purtan's people because I did the interviews and character stuff too. So, that's where that name came from.
Well, that stuff was absolutely priceless. Last thing I want to talk about is that you had a great career. You're still doing great. You still have your a Facebook page and a website, but you are very involved in charities, and you've raised so much money for Salvation Army, the Bed and Bread Club. You are on the board of the Children's Hospital of Michigan and ovarian cancer. These are your passions now, and you're still active, right?
There's three main ones, and those are the ones you mentioned, yes. And I'm still active on the board of all three.
And are you still doing the Salvation Army on the air thing, the 24-hour the marathon?
Yes. Yeah, I gave it over to JR about 10 years ago because when I was off the air, not on OMC anymore or any radio station, that it didn't have the impact. I knew it wouldn't have the impact, so I had to move it to a station. So I went to Edsel Ford Jr. and I said, look, I'd like Ford to get involved in this thing more than they already were, and it's going to be on JR, and I know that fits you guys real well. It'll be a nice fit. And so JR took it over at that point. So it's not the Dick Purtan Salvation Army Radiothon anymore, really. Officially, it's the WJR Radiothon. And so all the guys do it. They just rotate the guys through the day. And I joined them in the last, 8, 9 years, 10 years, I guess, I do the last 4 hours of the Radiothon. So I've gone from mornings to now doing evenings. Back how I began on Keener from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m.
It's amazing you've come full circle, Dick Purtan.
I have. Full circle. You're right, Jim.
All I know is thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for your career. I don't have a career in this business if it's not for guys like you who paved the way, and I really appreciate it. And thanks for being on Conversations with me.
Same right back at you, Jim. And thanks to Robbie, and hi to her, and to everybody, really. Just thank you very much for doing this, and hi to your audience.
What a pleasure and honor to talk with Dick. He is without question one of the real pioneers in our business. A guy like me who followed him to this market owes him $1 of every paycheck I get for paving the way for those who followed him. Always entertaining and as gracious as ever, my sincere thanks to Dick Purtan. Keep an eye on my Facebook page, Jim Brandstatter 76, and my Twitter account at Jim Brandstatter for more information on upcoming episodes of Conversations With. And you can listen to them on all your favorite podcast platforms, or go to thebrandyshow.com or jimbrandstatter.com and navigate to the podcast pages to find all the episodes from both Seasons 1 and Season 2. So long, and thanks for joining us, and tell a friend about Conversations With.